honored to be able to speak before you tonight, and I want to take this time out to thank my dad in the back who has joined me this evening to share with you. My name is Brian Worth, and my goal tonight is to present to you clear and irrefutable evidence that juvenile life offenders are not only redeemable, but they have the capacity to thrive as productive citizens in the community. Exhibit number one, my life. My life. When people first see me today, they can never imagine the darkness that God has lifted me out of. At the age of 12, I made one of the most terrible decisions of my life by joining the neighborhood gang. In the late 80s and the early 90s, I got sucked into the gang warfare that swept across Los Angeles. And I don't represent the older generation of gang members that listened to oldies and carried bumper jacks. But I represent the younger generation that listened to gangster rap and carried AK-47s. Needless to say, my life went on a downward spiral. I began to run away from home, and I began to disobey my parents and disobey the law until I got gunned down at the age of 14 years old. By the grace of God, I only got hit one time, but my left arm was paralyzed. My situation still did not wake me up, and I went in and out of juvenile hall until at the age of 6 years old, I was arrested for the last time. I know how it feels to be a teenager stuck in a dark place in life because I refuse to listen to my parents. I know how it feels to be in a situation where you have no hope. I remember when the detective came and arrested me. As he drove me off, I looked out into society as the people were going to school or work, and that detective looked back at me and said something I'll never forget. He said, "You better take a good look at them streets, boy, because you'll never see them again." Rebelliously, I stared back into them streets, and to them people, it was the start of another normal day. But for my 16-year-old mind, it was the beginning of the end. I got sent to juvenile hall, got kicked out eventually, and they sent me to the LA County Jail at 17 years old. I was a juvenile, slammed down in a one-man cell on a tier with the worst juveniles in Los Angeles. They were coming back with 25 to life, 15 years to life, but you never feel that pain until it happens to you. One day it was my turn, and in a courtroom full of people with my dad towards the front, the judge hit her little hammer and said, "Mr. Worth, we sentence you to life in prison." I stood back, and a gentleman in his 40s stood forward, and the judge hit her hammer and said, "Sir, I sentence you to 3 years in prison." And he broke down in tears. And I didn't say nothing, but inside I was screaming, "What are you doing? Why are you crying? Didn't you just see what happened to me?" And I couldn't understand his pain, but soon I would. I went back to the LA County Jail, and in a small one-man cell, I sat there with my face pressed against my knees. And I began to regret every time I disobeyed my parents. I began to regret every time I stayed out late and didn't go home, and it felt like a cloud of depression had just swept upon me. For me, I had no natural hope of ever going home. For me, I had no hope of being a father, no hope of being a husband, no hope of doing the things that normal people take for granted. I was done. But one thing that I stand here today to emphasize is that I thank God for the volunteers that enter into the prisons and institutions. Because as I sat there in that web that I was in, a volunteer came up the tier, and he grabbed my hands through the darkness of them bars, and he said a quiet yet powerful prayer over me in the name of Jesus. Something happened on my road to die a slow death in prison. good hands people came to my aid, and they lifted me up and they put me on their shoulder and they began to carry me. They taught me the morals and values that are in the Bible, and I begin to emulate them, and I begin to learn and educate myself, and my mind began to transform, and my speech began to transform, and my appearance began to change. As the years went by, people came to my side and they cheered me on like a long-distance runner on his last mile of the race. I thank God for Barbara. I thank God for Jane. I thank God for the people that have the courage enough to say, you know what, our young people are worth investing in their life, even though they shamed us. Last July, after 16 years in the darkness of prison, God touched the heart of Arnold Schwarzenegger to set me free. In 2002, I became the youngest inmate with a life sentence to ever be found suitable for parole. But as Miss Barbara was saying, the parole system is broken, and if people don't have help, juveniles are going to die in prison. For 5 years, the parole board and the governor played ping pong with my life. The parole board granted me parole, but the governors will block it. They said I grew up in gangs. I never held a full-time job, and I spent my entire adult life in prison. Therefore, because of that, they considered me a threat and blocked my parole. It wasn't until my wife, who was my childhood sweetheart, we've been together, we first saw each other at the age of 13. It wasn't until in 2006 she had the courage enough to appeal to the compassion of society to help me. And through the course of my wife's work, over 600 letters bombarded the office of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And in July, he finally said it was time for me to go home. I've been out for almost a year now, and I've been working a full-time job for about 10 months now. I'm probably the only one in here that enjoys paying taxes. I've launched the Young Man Arise tour, where me and my wife crossed Los Angeles and spread fresh hope to the hearts of the weary. A couple months ago was the test of my true citizenship. When I was at lunchtime, a young lady clipped the back of my truck. It was the first time I called the police. I said all that to say this, that I submit to you tonight that there are thousands and thousands of more young people like me in prison who made a mistake when they were a teenager, yet society by its laws have thrown them in a cell and threw away the key. I said that to say tonight that I pray that you would have the compassion enough to come along, Miss Barbara, come along, Miss Jane, and help mine the gold of our precious children that are in prison and dust them off and lift them up so that they too, like me, like Elias, can become productive citizens of this nation. Please don't let them die as would-be kings. Thank you very much.